Okay, everyone. Well, the clock has struck 10 o'clock, and I'd like to say good morning. I am Luli Castro, Swiftland's Executive Director, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this morning's webinar, Why is for You. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for your support of our Diversity Discovery Institute this year. Including today's registrants, we trained a total of 208 people through this wonderful journey. And that's an average of about 23 people per webinar. So we couldn't be happier, and we couldn't be happier to name Linda Bruno our diversity queen, as she was our facilitator for the great majority of the year. Thank you for your support, everyone. And I hope you learned a lot throughout the course of this 9-webinar series. We have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for you this morning with Linda, who certainly you should be familiar with by now, but let me tell you a little bit about her anyways. Linda has been developing and conducting training workshops for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers workshops and webinars on topics ranging from leadership skills to returning balance and lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from the University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management positions. She develops her workshops based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Linda is also certified with DDI, which is not the Diversity Discovery Institute, although we want to certify her with our DDI, and she's also certified with Achieve Global. 2 weeks ago, Swiftland had its first sign language interpreter on webcam, and I'm so excited to have Janet Sherwin of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Center here in Fort Myers with us. You'll see her in the top right-hand corner of your screen, and she will be providing sign language interpretation of what Linda is presenting today. So we're really excited to have her as part of our webinar team, and we hope to continue with this enhancement to accessibility to all of our webinars going forward. And now, please welcome Linda and enjoy her webinar this morning. Linda?
Thank you so much, Luli, and welcome to everyone today. My first question for you is, if you would go up to the little line across the top of your screen that shows all of the icons starting with the word meeting, layouts, pods, etc. There's a little man right there with his hand raised. Would you click on that down arrow? And if you have attended any of the other diversity webinars that we've had, would you raise your hand so that I can see that in the chat box? I'm just curious to see how many of you have already been in one of the programs before. Looks like several of you, and some of you are still finding the little man probably. Okay, I think most of you, if maybe not all of you, have already been in one of these programs. So you know that we've talked about a variety of things. We started out talking about the myriad differences that actually encompass diversity. It's often thought diversity in terms of culture or race or ethnicity or gender or things that are rather obvious to us, and yet the first session we talked about how many other things encompass diversity in our workplaces. We talked about identifying who you are so that you know where you are in this whole picture. We talked about, for the V, values, because even your values can be different from person to person. We talked about energizing your workplace with diversity, and that's exactly what it does, isn't it? Respecting others, no matter what their diversity is, because you are just as diverse to them as they are to you. We talked about stereotypes, and we even talked about in that session how some stereotypes are helpful. For instance, if we know that, quote, most teenage boys like video games, then we're going to use that stereotype in our programming. But we don't want to make assumptions about that into a stereotype that's going to be negative. We were joking about the hurricane coming this morning, Erica. And Luli and Jeanette and I were in the room, and Erin wasn't hearing us talking about this, but we were talking about how Erica was going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and couldn't make up her mind. And Jeanette and I were both thinking along the lines of it's because she's female that she couldn't make up her mind. That would be the stereotype that's out there, right? And Aaron commented that he wanted to say that but was afraid he was not allowed to. So you can see how stereotypes can affect that. Aaron, is there somebody's microphone on possibly? I'm getting some feedback. Just wanted to check on that because other people might be.
I think it might be Jeanette's microphone.
Oh. Okay. So my next question for you, or my next comment for you, is I want you to look at the quote that I put on the slide for today. And Luli and I were talking about this as well. When I saw that quote, it just screamed diversity to me. Today you are you, that is truer than true. There's no one alive who is youer than you. Of course, Dr. Seuss said that. But what I want to point out is that applies to the person sitting next to you, the person outside your office, the patrons you're going to interact with today, your family members, anybody you come across. They are the only you out there for themselves. There's a billboard that I see occasionally. It says, be the best you can be because you're the only one there is. So, something like that. It's probably not the right quote, but we need to understand that, don't we? That we all see the world through a different perspective, through different lenses, if you will. And that makes us diverse from anybody else we interact with. And there's a number of ways, as we've talked about, that diversity shows itself. So what I want to ask you today, since most of you, if not all of you, have been in at least one of the previous sessions, you know we've talked a lot about other people. But what diversity do you bring to your library? Would you type that into the chat box? We have quite a few attendees here today, and I'd like to see everybody give me an answer of what diversity you bring to your library. So just go ahead and type it into the chat box. True, Luli. It does depend on the role you're playing at any particular time, what diversity you can bring. One of the things I was thinking about before we signed on this morning was part of my diversity involves the breadth of my experience, if you will, because I had a corporate background. When I left the corporate world, I started a gift basket service of all things because I wanted to be completely away from the politics of the corporate world. And I did that for a while, and then I missed business and interacting with people and learning and those kinds of things, and that's when I started doing training. So there's quite a bit of breadth there for me that I can bring to the people that I work with. I've been the employee, I've been the supervisor, I've been at a level of leadership in a company, and so I bring all of that to the table to say, okay, here's what worked and here's what did not work. And as Tony said, he knows that he is in the minority, if you will, in the library field, although I see males in every program that I do pretty much. Every once in a while I get an all-female group, but mostly they're in the minority. There might be 15 people in the room and 1 or 2 or at the most 3 of them might be male. So Tony knows he brings that diversity. And sometimes for Tony, that's probably a frustration. And other times he knows what a benefit that is to his library to bring that perspective to his library. Ernestine brings training and leadership. How about the rest of you folks? What else do you bring to your library group? We have Tony and Ernestine, and I know there are other people out there that bring diversity to their libraries. What about you is different than somebody else that you work with? Lots of different things can be involved in diversity. That's what I want you to think about today. What diversity do you bring to the library? I see people typing, so I'm going to pause for just a moment to give them time to enter that into the chat box. And now it's multiple attendees, which I love. Aaron says, I'm a young'un. Yep, exactly, Aaron. And for some of us, we would say we're on the opposite end of that spectrum. Eva says from a different state and a different local history. Geography comes into play, doesn't it, Eva? It can be a different state as far as California to Oklahoma, or California to Tennessee, or Wyoming to Florida. There are a lot of different things that people grow up with in those different environments, and you bring that with you, don't you? Of course we adapt. That's what we do when we go to work. But when we come into our work environment with those different experiences and different life perspectives, then we bring a freshness, a newness to our library environments when that happens. Eva says it can be interesting to learn about new places. Absolutely. And Tony says he's a Yankee in Southwest Florida. Yeah, people might look at you a little differently. I was telling Guy the other day, I don't know if you get that commercial about, and I don't even know which car company it is. It's the year-end sales event, and the two older ladies, one of them calls it the rear end sales event. And you can just tell by their accent they're probably from the Northeast, and they're kind of abrupt and loud and those kinds of things. And we were joking that they've put those ladies in that part to represent a different part of the world and a different life stage and all kinds of things, because it adds diversity to the commercial. If you think about it, and I, of course, because I'm doing this Diversity Institute, thank you, Lily and Aaron, for allowing me to do that, because what it has done for me is I'm noticing it now even more in advertising and marketing and things like that. And I think that's good for us all to be exposed to that, so it just makes us more aware. Don says, I work in processing. I'm very organized, as well as having many other multiple customer service jobs to be able to help the other branches of the library system. I love that you mentioned that, Don, because there are people that are not inherently organized, aren't there? Some of that has to do with personalities, whatever, but it's a diversity, isn't it? And if we look at it as a diversity rather than a frustration, then it opens our eyes to a new way of thinking about it. If I think of Dawn as being organized and I'm not organized, and that frustrates me because she's always organizing things, then that's not going to be a good working relationship. But if I look at that and I say, hey, Dawn, could you show me how to do this because you are more diverse than I am in being organized, then she can help me do that. So even something like that would make a difference in how we interact with other people. And Valerie says, being a local, a true conch has helped me greatly. Yes, there you go. That's a whole different perspective, isn't it? I live in Ocala, and one of the reasons I like living in Ocala is there are a lot of locals here. And it surprised me when I first moved here 10 years ago because, you know, when people move from the north, and I came from Ohio, we sort of think that everybody in Florida came from somewhere else. But most of my friends that I've made in Ocala are native Ocalans, and their parents were here, and their grandparents were here. And so our thought processes are totally different because of one being local, one not being local. So there's a lot of different diversity that you're going to bring to your library. And I want you to remember that. And it's nothing to apologize for, no matter what your diversity is, unless you're just a negative person or something like that. We don't want to do that. But it's something to be aware of so that you can utilize it, so that you can capitalize on it, so that you can appreciate your own diversity relative to the people that you interact with, whether that's your patrons, your coworkers, your supervisors, whomever it might be. So now I want you to tell me all the things, and a couple of you have already mentioned this, how do the attributes that you think of as you being diverse, how do those benefit your patrons in your library setting? So go back and think about what diversity do you bring, and how does that benefit your patrons? For instance, for Tony, being a male librarian, Tony, how does that benefit your patrons? Would you type that in, all of you, would you type that into the chat box, please? Aaron, you go ahead and type yours into the chat box. All of you, please type that into the chat box. That's what we're talking about here, is you today and how you benefit your library through diversity. And I see that multiple attendees are typing. Great. Eva said, conversing about different places and lifestyles. And sometimes that's just a matter of helping people feel more comfortable in your library, isn't it, Eva? When you're able to do that, that makes them feel more welcome. We talk often about a library being your third place. And when we talk about third place, everybody has home to go to and we have work to go to oftentimes. But for a lot of us, there's one more place that we really want to be that sort of feeds our souls. And for a lot of people in your community, that may very well be your library. And the diversity that you bring to the library may be what's helping to create that very warm, welcoming, third place kind of feeling. And what happens from you doing that is that they want to come back, don't they? They're an advocate for your library out in the community. They tell other people about their good experiences at your library. And that's all attributable to the fact that you have diversity in your library. You're able to discuss with other people what is different about your library and make them feel welcome. And that is all helpful to making it the third place. I want to scroll up here and catch the rest of these. Lily says, I benefit Swiftland by training the staff. Having been here since 1998, I know each job and the role, and she's able to train them to be effective for the members. There is a fear, and probably justified in the library field, I read about it often in the library journal and so forth, that there will be a loss of knowledge over the coming years as people retire and there hasn't been any purposeful transfer of that knowledge. Not that anybody's tried not to transfer it, it's just that nobody's paid attention to it before. So if Luli had been going along not really paying attention and just training people in little pieces but not really paying attention to the entire picture, and Luli all of a sudden decided to move to Canada, then Swiftland would suffer from that because she has that wide horizon of what is necessary to serve the members. And yet in many libraries, the people with those wide horizons have not really been, nobody's tapped into that knowledge and that experience to be able to transfer it so that when they do leave, it's still there and available for the patrons. Mary says anytime there's a different viewpoint, it benefits groupthink. It benefits, yes, because groupthink is dangerous. Diversity helps prevent groupthink. And if you've never thought about the word groupthink, that just means when we all sit around together, we all start to agree. I'm going to go back to another commercial here because it just popped into my mind. It happens to be another car commercial. But you've probably seen the car commercial where they put the emblems of the cars on a table in front of people. And they tell them, now rate which car is the highest rated in, I think, safety, or customer satisfaction. I can't remember what the rating is supposed to be. And in the group, they're kind of looking around at each other a little bit, and they all start to move the higher priced car emblems to the top of the chart. So you have to know that even if somebody thought Chevrolet might have been the best rated, they probably look around the table and see everybody else putting those other emblems up there, and they're going to rate like the group does. And you lose that diversity, don't you, Mary? And the same thing happens in a library. If we're open to that and not frightened of that and not fearful that somebody might get more attention or whatever, then as Mary says, that diversity helps prevent groupthink, and we all end up with a better workplace. Ernestine says she can make training easy and fun, and that's what makes people learn, isn't it, Ernestine? Aaron says, my ease with technology lets me help patrons and members. Yes, thank you very much, and it's partly because of his age. Because we talk about digital natives and digital immigrants, and I'm an immigrant. I've used computers for many, 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 many years. As soon as they came out, our company had computers, but it was intranet, it wasn't email, and so I've grown into all of that, but I did not come into the world with all of that at my fingertips. We didn't have a TV, when I was first born, so that sounds scary. TV was invented, by the way, by them. We just didn't have it. So age has a lot to do with the diversity that comes into our library. And again, being open to that, both sides of it. I know that Aaron is open to the other side of age, of knowing that people that are older than he is have experience and maybe some wisdom they've developed over making mistakes and things like that, that helps him in his job as well. The mistakes that Luli has made, having been around for more than 15 years, actually benefits Aaron And if she was brand new and he was fairly new, it would be harder for them to develop that wisdom together, wouldn't it? Dawn says, my patrons are the branches of our library system. My organization and customer service skills let me keep them well supplied so they can take better care of the patrons. And you see, it isn't all about our direct contact with patrons, isn't it? Is it? Many of you don't have direct contact with patrons, but you are supporting someone else that does. And your diversity, as she mentioned, as Dawn mentioned, helps them be what they need to be to the patron to make your library the third place so that that is the preferred place they go when they want to do research, when they want to read a book, when they want to check out a game, a video, whatever. The thing is, not every library is looked at as a third place in its community, is it? I've had actual library staff members tell me that they do not use the library closest to them because it does not feel warm and welcoming, and they will go to a library farther away, and they actually work in libraries. And of course, I've had community members tell me the same thing. So one of the reasons we want to make sure we're using our diversity to benefit our patrons is because we want our library to be the library of choice in our area. Tony said, I find male students, especially from certain cultures, are more comfortable seeking help from a male librarian. That's a very thoughtful comment, Tony. I hadn't really even thought about it that way. I thought about the male perspective, but I hadn't thought about the male-to-male perspective. I thought about your perspective, Tony, and what you bring, but I hadn't thought about people coming in the door seeking you because they're more comfortable, especially if it's something more personal or something that would make them feel a little shy or inhibited. Then a male presence is going to make them feel more comfortable. That diversity adds a lot to that library environment, doesn't it? And Aaron says he agrees. He's seen issues with female library staff when they bypass them to talk to Aaron. Absolutely. It makes a big difference. No, I didn't say you made any mistakes, Lily. You observed them over the years, and that's what's helped you contribute, right? So just keep in mind that all of the things that bring diversity to the library, whether it's your diversity or somebody else's, actually make your library a better place, don't they? There's just so much out there for us to learn, for us to benefit from if we just open our eyes to that. So just keep that in mind. The next time you find yourself being the one that feels different, why is that good or why is that bad? And we're going to talk about the different differences here in a moment to help you think through as we end up our entire series. Okay, what is this bringing to my library and how can it be helpful? So if you've got your handouts there, we're now on number 3. How do the attributes benefit your coworkers? I think we've touched on that a little bit. For Erin, I know that benefits Luli because if she's like me, like she said, the 2 screens she was talking about this morning, if some of you were in the room, having 2 monitors. I had actually ordered 2 monitors for my husband who teaches college online, but he found it distracting to have the other monitor, so we ended up selling it on eBay. So that didn't really work for him. But there are different things that we may not be used to that somebody that has knowledge in that area can be helpful with. Now, what I want to kind of throw in here, which is a little bit contradictory maybe to what we've been talking about all along, because we've talked about embracing diversity and making sure that you see the other person's perspective and see it through their lens and so forth. And that is all absolutely true and absolutely critical. But I also want to say that just because somebody else is different or has a different perspective doesn't mean that you have to see things the way they do. You need to understand their perspective, but it doesn't mean you have to partake of that perspective, if that makes any sense. I'm going to give you an example. I'm a very visual learner. So for me, I've tried the electronic organizers, and they do nothing but frustrate me. And I started trying those probably 15 or 18 years ago when the word, if any of you remember the word Palm Pilot first came out. That was one of the first digital organizers. And I spent hours inputting all of my information, and then I realized about 30 days later that I hadn't accessed anything in there. I kept going back to my written notes. So I tried it again. And what I found was, because I'm so visual, I have to have something in front of me to look at. For me to have, I do have some notes on my phone, but for me to keep my calendar on there would be very frustrating because I would have to open every date to see what's going on. So for me, my diversity is that I am firm enough in my belief that my system works, and that's a little bit diverse in today's everything's technology world, that I use a calendar and I color code my calendar, and I can tell you in 2 seconds flat whether I have an available date or not. I don't have to open my phone app. I don't have to do anything. I open my calendar. It's right there in front of me. It's color coded. So I want to make sure we aren't saying we have to be like somebody else, because then we're defeating the whole purpose, aren't we? Then we lack diversity. If I figure I have to have the same perspective as somebody who grew up in the South, then I'm no longer bringing my northern perspective to things. If I figure I'm going to look like a Luddite, which I was called in one of my workshops because I use a paper calendar, if that bothers me to the extent where I force myself to use something that is not as useful to me, then I'm not bringing the diversity of, I'm going to call it wisdom, of knowing what works best for you. So keep in mind that it's great to understand diversity and embrace diversity and use diversity to benefit your library, but it's not necessary to try to become the other person. Remember our quote, "Today you are you. That is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you." And that's okay. We should add that to Dr. Seuss's quote. I'm not sure he would like that, but "and that's okay" should be added to that, because your diversity is that important. So type into the chat box. If you haven't typed something already that you think was directly related to coworkers, type something now into the chat box about how your diverse attributes benefit your coworkers. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to give you an example from my training. I worked on a team for several years with trainers who helped the unemployed. And we were contracted by our workforce board to come in and do programs for the unemployed. And when I first joined that team, the 2 other trainers were actually taking people's resumes and redoing them for them as part of this training. And I said, you know, number one, I don't have time, and I'm not trying to be rude, but number 2, they don't have jobs, so they do have time. Why don't we give them the tools, which we talk about in the training anyway, and have them redo their resumes, and then take a step back and say, okay, I'll review your resume now. And they thought I was so mean. One of them even told me a couple years ago, she said, you know, when you first joined our team, I thought, well, that is really mean. She should be doing their resumes for them. And she said, now I totally get what you meant. We weren't doing them any favors by doing their resumes, because they ended up not knowing what the resume said. The resume wasn't worded in the way they would have worded it. And when we started giving them tools instead of doing it for them, it made a huge difference. So my diversity, which was partly attributable to my personality, because I have a very get-it-done personality, but I believe in people taking responsibility, and it did not feel good to me to allow those people to give up responsibility for trying to find a job. And so my personality diversity, because the other 2 trainers are a different personality than I am, and we work very well together, that diversity of all of us brought us together as a really good team. Their diversity of being more willing in things to help people changed my attitude a little bit, so that I would actually volunteer time before the program started to look over the resumes and make notes. And then after they redid their resumes, I would volunteer time to redo them again. So they softened me a little bit, and I toughened them up a little bit. And it was a very helpful way for us to pull together as a team, and we got so many good comments. We got thank you notes from people, how much we had helped them by doing that, and so forth. So that's the kind of diversity that I'm talking about. And Ernestine commented with her coworkers, training step-by-step instruction sheets. And then I'm going to take that a step further, and I'm going to say, okay, Ernestine's talking about step-by-step instruction sheets for training, which is great for a person that learns by either looking at the steps or organizing the steps in their mind. But for somebody that's hands-on, then Ernestine probably steps in with the instruction sheet and she says, okay, here's the button you push to turn it on. Here's how you move the mouse around. Here's where you go to find this information. And so she's taking the diversity of the people she's working with, and she's adapting to that diversity. Because One of those styles probably isn't her natural teaching or learning style, and yet she's able to see that the diversity of the people she works with might require her to set them up for success by doing things in a different way than she would normally do them. And that's diversity in the library, isn't it? It's adaptation. It's being versatile. It's being willing to make changes. All of that encompasses being diverse in the library. Okay, now the rest of the page, we're going to talk about some of the specific areas. And what I'm going to ask you to do, because this is about you today, remember it said, Y is for you. That's the title of this program. I want you to think about these following areas that we're going to discuss. How can you become better at assisting your patrons and your coworkers and maybe even your supervisors, understanding them, empathizing with them, and I will add to patrons and coworkers and supervisors, think about this in terms of friends and family as well. This certainly isn't about friends and family. This is about your workplace. However, I have found that in most of my programs, there are nuggets of information that are very helpful when we take those nuggets and apply them to our personal lives as well. So as we're working through this, think about how you can become better at assisting, understanding, and empathizing with the people that you interact with based on, and the first one says age. So give that a moment's thought and type something into the chat box, if you will. How can you become better at either assisting them, understanding them, or empathizing with them based on age? Some of us in the room are young. Some of us, as me, are not so young. So there are different ages here, and I see several of you typing. For me, one of the things that I can become better at that I've really been working on is stepping back in time to remembering how life is different when you are decades younger than I am right now. Because it doesn't matter which generation, which group of people, when you are 30, life looks different to you than when you are my age. I'm not going to tell you what that is, but it is not 30. But it doesn't matter whether it's Erin's group or whether it's Linda's group or whether it's somebody's group that's 90 now. When we're 30, even if it was 60 years ago, we look at life differently than we do when we're 90, don't we? 31. There you go, Erin. I was close, wasn't I? There you go. Lots of patience and listening. Having more patience and listening to exactly what they need. That's exactly on target regarding age, isn't it? And I'm going to add to that whether or not they are 80 or whether or not they're 8. Let me throw something out to you that we don't often think about as far as diversity of age. We think about older people being lonely, needing more attention. They take longer to explain. Maybe they're not as up to date on technology. That's all true. I'm not going to go there. But what we don't always think about is that an 8-year-old needs to be listened to too, don't they? And I have witnessed so many times in the last several years that it almost makes me cry, being in a restaurant where mom and dad are on their cell phones and the kids can't get mom and dad's attention, and they're being good, they're not being disruptive or anything, but they're not interacting with their family. And some of you have probably witnessed that as well. So think about how that diversity of age comes into your library, 8 years old, and you're thinking, well, they're kids, you know, parents are taking care of them, I'll give them the books they need, and away we go. But maybe sometimes they just need to be listened to. And we always think about it, not always, but many times think about it at the opposite end of the spectrum as people get older, and that is certainly needed, because I will tell you, as someone who gets older, and you all are getting older right along with me, even if you're not my age, but we all get older, and the older we get, the less society listens to us. And so when somebody does, it creates a rapport for us, doesn't it? And we need to be able to create that rapport in our libraries. I see we're having a good discussion about age here. Great brains think alike, yes. What they wear. People wear different things based on their ages, don't they? Sometimes it's age appropriate, sometimes it's not age appropriate, but that's one of the things we need to understand about people. Now, will I ever understand somebody walking around having to hold their pants up with their knees? No, I won't understand it, but I'm not going to not assist them. I'm not going, maybe I'll empathize with them how their hips hurt when they do that or whatever. Oh, Aaron's 27. Okay, I was close. Tony says traditional students 18 to 21, they're very different from those returning to school in their 40s or 50s. I can attest to that, Tony. As some of you know, I just went and got my MBA in 2013. My class had 65 people in it at the University of Florida. I went for one weekend every month. I walked in the first day of class. There were those 65 people with an average age of 26. Love those people. Dynamic, really on top of things, but their attitudes and their sense of urgency and their sense of commitment and all those kinds of things, so different than what I experienced. So different, and frustrated me. I'm just going to be honest with that, right through to the very end of the program, because my grade depended on them. We had teams, and we stayed with our same team the whole course. We had a cohort, and the frustration level was very high. I understood that they grew up in a different era. I understood all of that, but I felt very strongly that they should try to also understand that if you're working on a team, you need to do what's necessary to be committed to the team. So it was very frustrating. And Tony, as he said, traditional students 18 to 21 are very different from those returning to school in their 40s or 50s. And they probably, see, and Aaron gets frustrated by that. But I did an assignment once, and I was talking to one of the women on my team, and the teacher had made professor had made a comment in class, and I looked at her and I said, well, it looks like that's the grade on this one's going to blow my chance at the Honor Society because only 20% get in. And she said, oh, that was never on my radar. And she was so dismissive of trying to do her best. But, of course, she was the one in our first weekend. We took a quiz. Should say second weekend. First weekend was orientation, had our assignments. We took a quiz. The second month we went back. And when she got her grade back, she said, well, I would have thought he would have been a little more lenient on partial answers. And she had sat the entire day of the day we were reviewing the material for the quiz, texting under the table, the entire class. We were in there for 3 hours, and she was texting the entire class. But she was frustrated with the professor. So you can see that some things, like I said, just because there are differences doesn't mean we have to buy into that's the proper way to be. I was in a leadership program for students several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and there were a couple of students, and there was a group of 18 or 19. There were a couple of students that said, I don't do much textbooking, and I don't participate in Facebook because if my friends don't have time to talk to me, they're probably not my friends. And I was stunned. And I thought, you go. Not that that's good or bad or indifferent, but I was thrilled that they were willing to step back and say, this isn't working for me, and I don't feel like I have a good relationship that way. So that's what I mean about utilizing diversity, but don't feel like you always have to be that other person, because you don't, and it's probably not going to work anyway. If I try to act young, I'm not young. People can tell I'm not young. I am not 27. I'm 37. No, I'm not. Even that difference sometimes can make a difference. How about life stage? Let's look at life stage. How can you become better at assisting, understanding, and empathizing with patrons, coworkers, family members, supervisors, etc., based on life stage? Now, when I talk about life stage, I'm talking about, is this person single? Never been married? Is this person in a relationship? Is this person the sandwich generation with older parents to take care of and younger kids to take care of? Is this person married with no children? Is this person a widow? Not necessarily all about relationship, but sometimes relationship does come into play with life stage. So how can you become better at assisting and understanding and empathizing with people that are in a different life stage than you are? If you've ever seen the saying that's been around for probably at least 30 years, there's a saying, and this is where the Red Hat Society came from, I believe, when I am old, I shall wear purple. Meaning when I'm old, I'm not going to care as much about what people think of me. And I think that does come into play with life stages. At some point you say, okay, been there, done that. I am who I am, and I'm okay with that. And then you just do what you need to do without being rude or anything like that. Dawn says it still comes down to having patience and listening to what they need. Absolutely, because life stages can be dramatically different too, can't they, Dawn? If I am married with no children, or my children are grown and gone, and I'm trying to help a young mother who has 3 little kids in tow, I need to be understanding about that. I need to empathize. If I've never had children, it's going to be more difficult for me to do that. So I can't be judgmental and critical of that. It's a diverse life stage we're interacting with here. So I have to step back and say, okay, what would be helpful to this mom right now? Well, maybe if I kept the 3-year-old busy while she's trying to find a book for the 7-year-old. But it might not be my natural inclination to do that because that's not my life stage. Tony says the retirees who maybe need to socialize a bit while using the library. Absolutely. I think that's a key point for a lot of you who are in communities where there's a high population of senior citizens or more mature people or retirees. That's a good word for it because sometimes they're in their 50s, sometimes they're in their 90s. But the older they get, they may have more of that need that Tony talks about because guess what? Part of their life stage involves they've lost friends. Some of their closest friends that maybe they've been neighbors with for many, many years are gone now, and they need that socialization. And over the years that they turn to the library more, don't they, for that than they used to. The library used to be where they came to, quote, check out books. But now the socialization piece of it's very important to them. And Valerie says we also have many retirees who volunteer, and they partly volunteer to feel productive. And I will tell you what triggers that in my mind. The other day I was walking my dog, and there's a fellow a few blocks away from us that has a Sheltie, and we used to have a Sheltie. And this fellow's in his 80s, and his dog's a couple years old. And one of the comments that he made to me the other day, he wasn't feeling very good last week, and I asked him how he was feeling, and he said, much better. But he said, I've decided that if I get really sick, then I'm not going to do anything drastic about it. He said, after all, I'm not productive anymore. And I thought, what a sad way to look at things. Even if you're not, he had a very high-powered job. He merged companies. He helped acquire companies, all kinds of things like that. And obviously, that was a big part of his life. But now he's at a stage of his life where he feels pretty much life is not worth living because he's not contributing anything. So one of the things I talk to people about is, help people feel productive. And I said, well, I'm sure your wife and your kids and certainly your dog want you to remain here. And he kind of perked up at that a little bit. Maybe hadn't thought of that before. But they need to feel important, don't they? Exactly, Tony. He's caring for his dog, and the dog's only 2 years old, so what's going to happen to the dog if something happens to him? So that's what I was trying to encourage him with. And the same thing goes for kids. I'm going to go back to that again. We talked about the listening, but sometimes life stage, they're at a point where in their young lives, a lot of things are coming into their minds about their own self-esteem and things like that, and maybe mom and dad both work, and maybe there are other children that we're taking care of, and maybe mom and dad have to take care of parents or whatever it is, and maybe they just don't get the attention that they'd like to have, that they crave, that they really need. And we so often hear stories about people who remember the person that they worked with at the library, or not worked with, but went to the library and that person was always helpful to them. Lots of people have those stories. So create those kind of stories as a way of becoming better at assisting and understanding and empathizing with the diversity through life stage. How about culture? How can you become better at assisting and understanding and empathizing with others based on culture? Anything come to mind there? That's one we're pretty well versed on, I think, because that's one we study a lot. And when we talk about diversity, it's one of the first things that comes up is talking to people about culture. So I'm going to let you think about that one and see if anything different comes to mind than what we've discussed in the past. And gender, we've already talked about a little bit. The next one we talked about in our differences program at the very beginning of the series because it's one we don't often think about. And surprisingly, in the comments that we had at the end of that first session, this is the thing that caught people's attention. The differences, and I'm going to address Tony's comment before we go on to introvert, extrovert. Tony says physical space could be very different for different cultures. Absolutely, Tony. And, I think it's unrealistic for us to know what everybody else expects, but we certainly can raise our level of awareness, can't we? To me, that's key. It's not that I'm going to be able to study every culture that might be in my community, but if I'm just aware of how they're interacting with me, sometimes that gives me very obvious clues as to how they want to be interacted with regarding their physical space, or even eye contact, right? Because that's something that in different cultures means different things, or touching, or whatever. We can be aware of how they're responding to us to help us determine how we need to interact with that particular person. Introvert, yes, exactly, Eva. We need to always just have that open mind to other cultures and realize that they are the only you from their perspective, and that's okay. Introvert extrovert is one that can trip us up pretty easily, especially, and here I'm going to turn back to our internal customers, especially with our coworkers. In the library environment, the majority of people that I have come across have been introverts. Not all of them, and certainly there are a lot of extroverts in the library environment, but one of the things that introverts like is quiet. And the library, and I know you're all laughing at this, used to be perceived as a quiet workplace, didn't it? A reflective, structured, quiet workplace. And I think that's what draws the introvert kind of personality, if you will, or temperament. But when we have the extroverts in our workplace, the two of us don't understand each other. And as I mentioned, those other two trainers that I used to work with, and we still get together a couple times a year, but we don't have an opportunity to work on teams anymore. But the other two are high extroverts. And it's always about partying and going out afterwards and having a cup of coffee and this and that, and give me a call and we'll chat and we'll have lunch and all those kinds of things. And I'm an introvert. And so part of our sort of disconnect when we were first trying to figure out who we were on the team was that I'm highly introverted, and neither one of them understood that because they're highly extroverted, and in their mind, you can't be a trainer, a facilitator, without being extroverted. But you really can, because as we've talked about before, the introvert gets their energy and gets recharged from quiet alone time. The extrovert gets recharged from being with people. That's one of the primary differences. It's not a matter of I'm shy, I'm backward, I can't speak to people. None of that. Obviously, that's not true. But I do get recharged by being quiet. I do think through things usually internally instead of talking them out with people, which is another difference. So that's something to be very aware of. How can you become better at assisting and understanding and empathizing with patrons and coworkers based on whether you're an introvert or an extrovert? What comes to mind when you think about that? I see Luli is typing. She can see her I and E changing in the Myers-Briggs profile. Mary says, I think my sensitivity to noise makes me intolerant of extroverts in the work environment. Thank you, Mary. That's a very vulnerable, transparent thing to say, and I appreciate that because I'm the same way. She says, I have trouble getting work done and I need to figure out how to not get frustrated. I really need to become better at empathizing with this group. Absolutely. I'm the same way. And I finally got to the point where I would actually talk inside my head, of course, because that's how introverts do it. I would actually talk to myself about the fact that they were showing extroverted tendencies when they were doing some of these things. And although it didn't make me happy about the way they were interacting, it at least allowed me to understand them better. And over a period of time, I've become able to be very not dismissive in a negative sense, but dismissive in the sense that, oh yeah, they're just being extroverts. So it's become a little easier for me to do that because I've raised my awareness in that area. And when I read the book, if any of you need help with that, read the book by Susan Cain called Quiet, or watch her TED Talk, and that's C-A-I-N, Susan Cain. I just read that about 3 years ago, and although I suspected I was an introvert, people kept telling me I was an extrovert. As recently as just a few months ago, somebody walked up to me at a workshop, and she touched me on the arm, and she said, "You're not an introvert, and don't let anybody tell you that." And I said, nobody has to. I know I'm an introvert. I know how I recharge and how I get my energy. So I wasn't going to let her lack of diversity, because she felt because I was up speaking to somebody I had to be an extrovert, I wasn't going to let her influence me. I still know that I'm an introvert. And Susan Cain's book helped me understand that I'm not defective because of that. And sometimes I think that comes into play with all diversity, doesn't it? At some level, in some area of society, each of these different diverse things that we are talking about is deemed as being negative. If I'm older, that's negative. If I'm younger, that's negative for a different group. If I'm an introvert, that's negative for the extroverts. If I'm an extrovert, it's negative for the introverts. If I'm male, it's negative for the female, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we have to come to realize is there is no negativity inherently connected to the different areas of diversity. Can they be negative? Certainly. Can old people be grumpy? Certainly. Can young people be bratty? Certainly. Old people can be too. So there is some negativity that can be exhibited, but the diversity itself is not negative. Luli, I don't know why I can't please everybody, but I certainly would like to keep trying. I'm working on that. And Lily also said how we think things through. We can think about that. And if we work with somebody that, let's say, is an introvert and we're not, we need to understand that the introvert needs to think things through a little more deeply and a little more quietly rather than us yammering in their ears all the time, or vice versa. If I know I'm working with an extrovert, I need to be a little more willing to speak to that person, don't I, and to express my thoughts. Yes, Mary, I think it would be very helpful to you, and it's a very easy read. I've read about, I'm going to say maybe 5 total books on introvert, extrovert. A couple of the others were okay. One of them I didn't care for at all, but Susan Cain's was by far, to me, the one that made the most sense. She includes some research, but she also includes the real life stuff, and that's what's meaningful to me. So to me, and think about patrons. Let's turn it back outward again. Think about our patrons coming in who are maybe extroverts and they want to talk while they're at the counter, or they want to visit. And if you are not that way, that diversity causes a bit of friction, doesn't it? Until you open your mind and say, you know what, they just like to visit. I need to get out of my introvert self, because we can all do that, and visit for a couple minutes. We have to adapt, don't we? That's what living life means, and that is adapting to the people that we interact with. So the introvert, extrovert, whichever one you are, just needs to step back and say, you know what, I can deal with this for a few minutes while I'm trying to adapt to their particular preference, and that's really what it is. And some people are kind of in the middle. I see the term ambivert in places where you're part of one and part of the other, and I think we can all do that when we need to. But we also all need to know our preferences. I love this little cartoon. I'd love to hang out, but I have to go sit in my house by myself. That's what the introvert would say. That's what the extrovert would say. They would love to hang out, and you would see how sad they are, and the introvert would be looking forward to sitting in there by themselves, wouldn't they? So there's a big difference there in how we perceive things. How about personalities? Many of you have heard me talk about from time to time the Wired That Way personality profile, which is a profile that I use in a lot of my workshops because it's very easy to absorb, very easy to understand, very easy to remember, which I think is key. And so the differences in personalities can be so diverse that we almost look at them like the Mars-Venus thing. Because when I'm working with somebody that's the total opposite of what I am, I forget that it's a personality thing, and I forget that it's about diversity, and I start to just wonder how a person could think that way. And I have to stop myself and say, you know what? They are the only you there is, and I'm the only you there is too. So I have to stop and think, how can my personality, how can I become better at assisting and understanding and empathizing with patrons and coworkers, and for me, clients, based on personality? So think about that for a second and type something into the chat box, especially if you know what your personality is. How can you use your personality to become better at working with the other diverse personalities? I see some people typing. Dawn is typing. Thank you. My personality is what's considered powerful with a secondary imperfect, which means I like to get it done, and I like to get it done right, so I can be rather demanding. But that also, if I can sort of hold that back a bit, it can also help me guide other people who don't have the organizational skills and don't have the urgency and things like that. I can help move them forward. Exactly, Lily. Just being more flexible and understanding that even though they may be on the opposite side and we totally don't get how they could think that way, they do. They think that way. And us being frustrated by it is not going to change it. We just need to be flexible. And Dawn said you have to be open-minded, actually realize what personality you're dealing with, and then be more flexible and help them. Exactly, Dawn. The more we understand who we're standing across from, and the more we understand who's standing across from them. So the more you understand yourself, the better you're going to be able to deal with any of these diversities, right? Because if you don't understand yourself, then it's going to be very difficult for you to be objective about what you're expecting from the other person. You're still going to be projecting your own expectations on them if you don't understand yourself. Based on that, I want to jump ahead a little bit because I knew we wouldn't have time to cover all of these, but I wanted to list them there for you. If you'd like to take this handout and just kind of work through them afterwards to say, you know what, there are some other areas that I could do better at with diversity. So let's take a look here. I want to jump to emotional intelligence, which is about 5 up from the bottom of page 1 on your handouts. And the reason I want to go there is I think emotional intelligence comes into play with every area of diversity. I was giving a program in North Carolina a while back, and it was a leadership program. We were focusing mainly on personalities and emotional intelligence. And somebody came up or raised their hand actually during the class and said, so how do I get my people to buy into this emotional intelligence thing? And I stopped for a minute because I never want to make anybody feel bad in a program, but I had to draw that person's attention back to the fact that we were talking about their emotional intelligence. And they had kind of missed that whole point. And it was sort of like, gee, if everybody in my workplace is emotionally intelligent, if I can make them be emotionally intelligent, then we're going to have a better workplace. And I said, today's workshop is not about them. It's about you. You being self-aware. You being able to manage the emotions you have about the diversity that you're interacting with. That's where emotional intelligence comes into play with diversity, isn't it? If you think about Daniel Goleman's model of emotional intelligence, there are 4 elements. Very easy to remember, very spot on as far as I'm concerned. In some versions of the model, they add motivation, but to me, that's self-management, so I keep it with the original 4. Self-awareness, and everything we've talked about today has been focused on self-awareness, hasn't it? Y is for you. That's self-awareness. And when we're talking about emotions, what are my emotions? I need to be aware of them. Am I angry at this different person, this diverse person? Am I frustrated? Am I fearful? Am I apathetic? Am I sympathetic? What are my emotions going on? And then for me to be able to deal with diversity in a positive, sustainable way, I need to manage the emotions I'm feeling about that. So if that older person comes in and it's the 3rd time they've been in this week and it's only Tuesday, then I need to say, okay, my emotion is frustration here because I know they're going to want to talk. My next question to myself is, why am I feeling frustrated? That's where the self-awareness moves into self-management, because if I don't know the why, I can't manage that emotion. So I start with that self-awareness. I'm feeling frustrated. Why am I feeling frustrated? Well, I've got so much to do today. Okay, but what's my real job? Taking care of patrons, right? If I don't have patrons, I don't have a library. So my real job is taking care of patrons. Today's need happens to be Mrs. Smith. Even though she's been here 3 already, I need to spend a few minutes with her. And sometimes, if we actually spend that time focused on that person, it takes less time. It's when we decide we're trying to brush them off that they keep hanging on. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were distressed about something that was going on in their lives, and we had talked about it, and I needed to wrap up the phone call, and this person kept talking, and I love this person, so I kept listening, and the phone call, neither one of us had had dinner yet. It was 8:15 last night, and the phone call kept going on, and I just kept thinking, you know what, I can eat whenever we're done here. I was very hungry, but I could eat. And so I had to sort of, why was I feeling rushed to get off the phone? Well, because we've done this before, and I know this person loves me and cares about me, and so I just talked as long as he wanted to talk. And I tried to use my self-awareness and my self-management to make sure that I had social awareness, which is the next element. We've talked about self-awareness, self-management. Social awareness is when I understand his feelings, when I understand, am I going to hurt his feelings if I say, well, I got to go, because he knew at 8:15 at night I wasn't going to be doing any work or anything. Why did I have to leave? So that led to my social awareness. If I had showed my frustration about wanting to get off the phone, then I have no social awareness. The social awareness piece is about understanding their emotions and how my emotions influence what they're feeling. And then if I do that, I move into relationship management. So we left feeling warm and fuzzy about each other because I was able to go through that real quick cycle of saying, here's how I'm feeling to myself, here's how I'm feeling, here's how I'm going to manage it so that I can have this good relationship with him. I'm going to be aware of what he's feeling. And part of it was, it's actually my nephew that I'm talking about. I love him. He loves me. It's my husband's nephew. And part of it is he's very sad that he doesn't get to see his uncle very often. He came down to visit us in Florida in April because of everything, all of my husband's health issues and things. And last night he just needed that familial contact. And I could hear it in his voice. And so I just sat there with him until he was done. That's emotional intelligence. How often does it happen in the library environment? Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe your coworker has been totally stressed out because they're trying to deal with parents, or they're trying to deal with kids, or they're trying to deal with financial issues, or whatever it might be, or their own health issues. You get frustrated because they're not doing their work like they used to. That's a very common, normal, natural human reaction. Then you need to be self-aware of that and say, okay, how am I going to manage that emotion? I like people to get their work done, but how am I going to manage that emotion? I need to step back, don't I? I need to see the diversity of life stage here this person is dealing with compared to mine. I need to understand what my comments are going to mean to them. How am I going to influence their emotions through my comments? And I need to make sure my comments are influencing them in a positive way, which would lead to our relationship being managed then. So do you see how deep that can get with diversity, with emotional intelligence? Did anything pop up to you as I was talking about emotional intelligence? Would you type that into the chat box? Because that is a whole different topic. We could do days on that. I've done full-day workshops on that. I've done half-day workshops on that. I've done webinars on that because it's very self-reflective and kind of, for me, it was life-altering when I first learned about it, and has continued to be because I continue to try to draw it into my everyday experiences. Lily says, I love emotional intelligence. Me too. And I think it's something that I'm never going to be good at. I'm going to say I'm going to improve on it. But I think as human beings, it's so easy to slip back into being emotionally unintelligent over the course of a day, over the course of working with people, that I think it's something that if we raise our awareness, we can always take a step forward. Eva says, like you said, listening to what they're going through. And sometimes they don't even tell us, do they, Eva? We have to listen with our senses. We have to look at them and see their posture and hear their sighs and see the sadness in their eyes or the happiness in their eyes. Or, it's just as important to recognize people's excitement or whatever. If you've ever watched Big Bang Theory, there is a huge lack of emotional intelligence for Sheldon. In one episode, he's extremely intelligent, but he's not socially intelligent. He's not emotionally intelligent. And in one episode, Amy was very excited about some kind of an award or recognition that she had gotten, and he was busy ordering cuticle clippers or something on his phone. And it's just as important to be emotionally intelligent with people when they're happy, isn't it? And yes, exactly, Ernestine. Look at what they're not saying. And even when they're happy, we need to tune into that. And even if we're not at that time, we need to draw on their happiness and share that with them because we deflate them if we don't. And that's a part of diversity. How emotionally intelligent are you willing to be? I know people that tell me they're emotionally intelligent because they'll say, I know who I am, and if nobody likes it, they don't have to like me. That's not being self-aware. Yeah, there's a piece of self-awareness there, but the self-awareness piece is meant to be thought-provoking and to help you develop personally, not to dismiss your actions with excuses. That's not what self-awareness is. So emotional intelligence to me is a big piece of this. And The last one I want to think about here before we turn the page to page 2 is conflict style. Because we have people that can be very assertive, which is a very positive way of dealing with conflict, that can just calmly discuss this with you and say to you, can we talk about this? And this may be more of an internal kind of thing that you're dealing with coworkers or supervisors. But we have the passive-aggressive people who say and do things to spite us, so to speak. And then we have the aggressive people that are in our faces. And so there's a diversity there that we need to be able to be emotionally intelligent about and be able to handle it in a positive way. This is a tough one for me. I am not an in-your-face kind of person. If I tend toward one or the other, now I work really hard on being assertive, but if I tend toward one, it's more the passive-aggressive. I was the biggest pouter of them all, if you will, when I was a child. That's how I dealt with any conflict, because I had a dysfunctional family background and all that stuff, and so my way of acting out, if you will, was to pout, to withdraw. I carried that into adulthood. I've worked on it tremendously over the last, I'm going to say 15 to 20 years, but there are still times if I'm tired, if I'm frustrated, if I'm not feeling well, that I go back to that passive-aggressive thing, and that diversity of dealing with people who have different conflict styles can cause a lot of issues. So I just think it's important for us to understand that patrons coming in, as well as our coworkers or our supervisors, may have a different, diverse way of dealing with conflict. If you are a supervisor, take a step back on this one. I often have supervisors who tell me they don't want to approach a person who needs discipline. They've talked to the person 15 times, but nothing changes. Well, nothing changes because there are no consequences, and that's that diversity of conflict style. The supervisor doesn't want conflict, and so they will avoid it by just talking, thinking that's going to make it go away. But other people in your environment then are observing that, and it's causing more friction. So something as simple as conflict style and the diversity of our conflict styles can cause problems in our work environment. Now, if we turn the page to page 2, we start talking about things like upbringing, education, sexual orientation, religion, politics, learning and communication styles. I am not going there on religion and politics. We're not going to talk about that today. I put it on the list because I think it's important for all of us to understand the diversity of those areas, of course, and the tolerance that's needed in a library environment. But I do want to address a little bit upbringing. As we talked about earlier, different locations. We talked about geography a little bit. We touched on that a little bit earlier. But upbringing itself is so diverse, and it's become so more widely diverse in recent years than it ever has been before. Years and years ago, when the diversity started, I will say it's always been there to some extent, but when it really started to expand was when women went into the workplace and we talked about latchkey kids. And suddenly upbringings were not, you get off the bus and mom is home baking cookies. It was you get off the bus and you go in the house by yourself and you entertain yourself for an hour or so. So upbringing and how that affects us has diversified substantially over the last couple of decades, 3 decades or whatever. And I think it makes a difference, as we said, with geography. I grew up in a rural Midwestern town. When I meet people that grew up in New York City, it's as if we came from different planets. There is no concept of looking at the stars at night, catching lightning bugs like we used to do. There's no concept of running out in the yard barefoot, going down to the creek, whatever it was. That was all very rural, and that's where I grew up. But for me, there's no concept of going to the opera when you're 8 years old, or riding the subway when you're 10, or whatever it might be. I read a book daily, and there's a family in there. They have 5 children, and they talk about putting the kids on the subway in New York City, and it just boggles my mind because I don't have an understanding of that. So there's a diversity there that if I'm working with those people, I need to understand, remember that lens we talked about first thing today? They are looking through a lens that I've never even peeked through. Now, I've been to New York City a few times, but I've never lived that life. And even moving from Ohio to Florida, yes, there are major, major differences, but there's still a lot of basic things that are similar in Ocala because Ocala is horse country. So it's similar to a rural area in Ohio, even though it's not rural anymore. So do you see how that upbringing, when people are walking into your library, they bring that diversity of upbringing? Without naming any names or anything, can you pop into the chat box somebody that comes into your library or somebody you work with who has a totally different upbringing than you do? Don't give me any names, just the differences that you've recognized. Maybe, like I said, they grew up in New York City, you grew up along the ocean, whatever it might be. What can you think, what experience have you had with diversity in upbringing, with either somebody you work with or somebody that comes into your library on a regular basis? Take just a second to type that into the chat box. I know you have this happen every day and you've probably not thought much about it, but it can affect how we interact with people because it is a different perspective on life. I see Aaron is typing. I'm not sure if he's typing to me or someone else. Oh, absolutely, Aaron. That's a great one. I need to add that, don't I? That's huge. That could be a whole separate topic. As I said, I grew up in a rural area. My dad worked. My mom didn't for many, many years when I was growing up. We had two big, large gardens. The kids worked in the gardens. We gave food away to people that needed it, but we didn't have the newest clothes. We didn't get the coolest things when we started school every year. That's a great comment. That financial upbringing can, and people who were raised in a different environment don't get that. I have a friend who's been well off all of his life. He's not, a billionaire or anything like that, but it's always been substantially well off. His parents were well off. They left him money. He worked at a high-level executive job. He amassed more money. And until his divorce, when his wife took him for half of everything he had 6 months after the prenup expired, he was very, very well off. And he still is well off. But in his mind, as Aaron said, rich versus poor, he looks at himself now as being poor because he doesn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars pouring in every year. And he's, quote, only living on X amount of dollars, which is about, I would say, in the neighborhood of 5 times, no, maybe 8 times more than my sister lives on, who is disabled. And he still doesn't get it. So that's he doesn't see that other lens there. And I thank you so much for bringing that up. Big families versus small. Huge difference. And then when we get to only children, huge, huge, huge difference, right? And a diversity of how they see things. I've known people that I've had dinner with people before that have said to me, I've said, do you want to split the meals when they come and we can try each other's? And I had somebody tell me, no, I was an only child. I don't share. And I almost sat back in my chair. I thought that person was joking at first. And then I went, no, that would be how you thought if you were an only child. And I don't get that. I was raised in a family of 3. We were always scrambling when we were young to have enough food, so you shared whatever you had. Even said coworkers grew up in a more rural area as opposed to me growing up in an island environment. Just like being on a different planet, right? I understand. But that's what I want you to say, is that it's so much deeper than anything we've talked about as we go along because of Dr. Seuss's quote. And because we talked about at the very first session, we are just like snowflakes or fingerprints because there are no two alike. And it's, yes, bilingual families. That fascinates me, and I envy that. And I'm not really able to engage as much with that because I'm not. And those are the kinds of things we need to understand. The last one on this list that I'd like to talk about before we kind of wrap up the program here in just a moment is learning and communication styles. I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but for those of you who do any kind of training, any kind of teaching, any kind of presentation, any kind of help, which is really everybody in the room, if we understand there are differences, and people call them learning styles, communication styles, they call them different things, but I hear the same basic information when we talk about being visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. And I don't really care what title you give that. It can make a difference in how people perceive what you're telling them. I read an article the other day that almost offended me because this person said, you know what, I don't think we need to worry about other people's communication and learning styles when we teach and when we train. And I went, you know what, if I'm in your session, you do, because I'm visual. I was telling somebody the other day, actually it was Luli and Aaron and some people, we were on a conference, and I said, I try to engage you, and it's not as engaging today because we have a long list here, but I try to engage you with the fill-in-the-blanks, with the different artwork and things like that, because I know there are visual people in the room that need something to keep their attention. There are kinesthetic people that when they write things down, it helps them remember. There are the auditory people that I'm speaking to. We have the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic in most rooms. And I was telling them I try to engage all of them because I call it the popcorn effect on a webinar. I take webinars. I still attend webinars. And when somebody puts up one slide at the beginning and the next slide an hour later, I'm up popping popcorn because there's nothing to engage the visual part of me, which is my highest preference. That's one of the reasons I try to keep you visually engaged. So I hope that you think about that when people come into your library. Are they visual? Are they auditory? Are they kinesthetic? No, you're not going to give them a test to find out, but you certainly can start to sense that about people that come in frequently, can't you? Because you know that they say, well, show me. If they say, well, show me every time you talk to them, or draw me a map, or can you point to the right location, or what will I see when I get there, they're visual people. If they're just listening very attentively and sort of recording it all in their minds as you're talking to them, they're probably auditory. If you need to actually physically take them there or give them a touch point, if you will, you see that fuzzy lamb over in the corner? That's where those books will be. Then that will help them interact with you on a higher level, if you will. So remember that visual, auditory, kinesthetic thing, because that can be really helpful as well. We talked a little bit about emotional intelligence, actually a lot, and I just wanted to retouch on that because I think it can be an underlying foundation for lots of things in our lives, for our own personal development, for understanding our own diversity, but for helping us with others as well. So let's look at that again in case you wanted to write them down on your handouts, because I went through them rather quickly earlier. What I see and what I do. So the what I see part is the awareness piece, whether it's self-awareness or social awareness, and the what I do part is how I'm going to manage each of those pieces. The personal part of that would, of course, be self-awareness and self-management, and the social competence would be social awareness and relationship management. So I've listed them for you on the handouts. We have self-awareness and social awareness as the two pieces of what I see. We have self-management and relationship management of what I'm going to do with what I see. They're listed in this order because you really can't have the last two, social awareness and relationship management, without the first two, self-awareness and self-management. So that's why I've listed them in that order, because if you're not self-aware and you're not managing your own emotions, it's going to be very difficult for you to tap into someone else's emotions and try to help your relationship through that understanding. So that's the piece of emotional intelligence. So I want to give you just a moment to write those down if you need to. And as I said, this is based on Daniel Goleman, and I'm going to type that in just so you have his name. I will tell you the name of another book, the Emotional Intelligence Quick Book, and it is by Travis Bradbury. I'm typing this all in as we go, and Jean Greaves. I read both of those books, and I've read other things on emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman's book is a great foundational book, but I will tell you it's pretty theoretical. It's research-based, which it needs to be, but I fell asleep a few times because it's pretty heavy stuff. There were parts of it that were very entertaining, and then there were other parts that I kind of plodded through. After I read his book, I read a book called The Emotional Intelligence Quick Book by Travis Bradbury and Jean Greaves that was much more helpful to me because it put everything that Goleman said into Linda Bruno terms. It was easier for me to understand and grasp. So I've got that in the chat box for you if you need to refer to that, if you'd like to read something on that It was very helpful. I tell people when I learned about personalities, it was life-changing. When I learned about emotional intelligence, it was life-changing. So those are some recommendations I can make for you today. When we're talking about emotional intelligence, we're talking about being able to manage the logical, rational part of our brain with the limbic system, which is more about the emotions. We've all known people that get stuck in the emotional piece and they can't get beyond their emotions, and we've all known people that don't seem to have any emotions. Emotional intelligence comes into play when we can combine both of those in a way that makes us more aware of ourselves and other people and helps us manage those relationships. Number 6 is just a question for your reflection, and feel free to type this into the chat box as well. Which area of diversity do you find, and frustrating might be the wrong word, but particularly frustrating or maybe harder for you to deal with, or something that you at least need to be more aware of? Which area that we've talked about, and we've talked about really probably dozens over the course of this series. We've only dwelt on a few, but we've touched on many, many areas. Is there an area that you find harder to understand or harder to control in yourself or harder to work with? You don't need to type it into the chat box. If you would like to, you certainly can, but I know that's a very personal question. Feel free to type it or write it down on number 6. I think is helpful as a piece of that emotional intelligence for us to understand the areas that we struggle in, because that's what this whole series has been about, opening our eyes, not changing other people, but opening our eyes to what we struggle with dealing with in diversity, and then making changes so that we become better at it. And you notice I didn't say we become perfect at it, just better at it. Number 7 says, and we've talked about this, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but if you're reacting well to diversity in a positive way, then you are doing well with your listening skills, and that's something that can be developed. And in my case, I have to redevelop it occasionally because I get pretty good at it for a while, and then life hits and I've got lots of things on my mind or whatever, my listening goes by the wayside. So I do want to encourage you to continue to work on listening skills, because not only will it help you with diversity, it will help you in life, period. What I am finding and what I am reading about is that more and more people are feeling that they're not being listened to, whether that's in a family setting, a workplace setting, in a customer-oriented setting. People are not being listened to. We know that texting is contributing to that, and I am even finding that when I do a chat with a company that I'm trying to resolve something on, they're not even listening to what I say in the chat anymore. And that's so frustrating. And I don't go into any length. I will type 2 or 3 sentences about here's what happened, when it happened, order number, what should I do, and I get an answer back that doesn't even apply to what I said. In one chat I actually had to say, and I wasn't trying to be mean, would you please reread my previous statement? Because they had answered me with an answer that didn't even apply to what I had asked. So listening skills are huge in diversity, because there's already that little disconnect, isn't there? If we are diverse from someone else, and we always are, there's that little bit of different perspective that we already have coming into this conversation or interaction. If we don't listen, we multiply that disconnect. When we listen, we may still not understand or be like they are, but we're moving closer to understanding and empathizing, aren't we? So listening skills can be huge. Find ways to intentionally work with those people who are different than you. And it might be uncomfortable at first. Or you might think, oh man, I don't want to work with that person. He or she does this, or he or she isn't my age, or he or she's different than I am. Yes, they probably are. But you know what? When you open your mind, things actually drop into it. We actually learn things when we open our minds. So, number 9 says, let's review. What are the benefits to your library when your employees are able to celebrate diversity they experience on a daily basis? Just pop one into the chat box. What's one benefit to your library when we're able to look at diversity in a whole new way now that we've been through this series? Eva says, understanding each other. Absolutely. It's kind of a relief to do that, isn't it, Eva? Instead of thinking, why aren't they like me? That's called being egocentric. To think, gosh, they aren't like me, and that's pretty cool. I can learn something from that person. Always. I can't think of any diversity that we can't learn from somebody, even if it's a diverse, something as diverse as they're negative and they're an optimist and I'm a pessimist, or vice versa. We can learn from that. Better communication when you celebrate diversity. Absolutely. What else can you think of? Do you think morale might be better? If we're understanding people better and we're communicating more effectively, would morale go up in your library if everybody decided to just improve a little bit on how they celebrate diversity? I think morale would improve. The image of your library would improve, wouldn't it? Because people would come in and they would feel a different atmosphere. They would feel that you are communicating better, that you are trying to understand each other. We don't always succeed. When morale is better, productivity is better. When morale is better, there's less absenteeism, because let's face it, if I'm the only introvert in the group and people make fun of me, and I have had people make fun of me because I'm an introvert, if I get up in the morning and I'm really tired and I don't feel very good, I'm going to call in and say, you know what, I don't feel good, I'm not coming to work today. But if I know that my teammates understand me and they really try to see my viewpoint, I'm going to take an aspirin and come to work. So absenteeism can be affected. People stay at places they enjoy working when diversity is celebrated and there's not that tension and nobody's trying to understand each other. So even retention can be affected. A few additional tips just to wind this up, because I know Luli wants to give you some more information. Dawn says with morale improving, it also makes you more effective. Absolutely. So the efficiency is better. Effective and efficient. That's exactly right. And that's the goal for every organization, isn't it, Dawn? It doesn't matter whether you're a for-profit, a non-profit, a whatever, a library, a bank, a retail place. Everybody needs to be efficient and effective. Other tips to help celebrate diversity. We recommend, highly qualified, diverse candidates for open positions. Because if you're a good employee, your recommendation is going to carry a lot of weight. Invite coworkers to community events. That maybe it would be different for one or the other of you, but go to a festival, go to something that's happening in the community together. Because as you do that and you share that experience, you learn about each other. Make sure any committees you serve on have a diverse mix of people, and if they don't, bring it up and recommend somebody that might be good on the committee. Ask others about their experiences. Can you tell me what it's like to live in Brazil? What's it like to live in England? Find out about those things. The more you know, I think part of the reason we hesitate about some diversity is that we don't understand what it is we're trying to interact with. And the more we ask, the more we know. Show appreciation to everyone. That celebrates diversity. Value their contributions. Those are just a few little things to think about as we think about all the myriad ways that we've talked about over the course of this entire series, how to celebrate diversity. And we've covered a lot of territory. So the $64,000 question is, what are you going to do differently regarding diversity in your workplace? And I know Luli has something she'd like to talk to you about today, so I'm going to wrap up my session by saying thank you so much for attending this series, and especially today's session, and for being so open to the ideas that we've expressed, and especially for your participation. I look forward to seeing you again, possibly in year 2 of DDI. Thanks, everybody, and Luli's up next, so don't leave the room.
Well, thank you, Linda. That was absolutely awesome. I saw the wonderful tie-in that you did for everything that we covered this year. Thank you so much. Thank you for today's wonderful webinar, which was just spectacular. I was finding it difficult to do other things while you were talking today. We are very lucky to have been able to participate in this learning opportunity throughout the year. Great information, and now I'll give you a sneak peek of what's coming up. Diversity Discovery Institute Year 2 begins in October. We're happy that we had such a wonderful reaction to it and embracing of the topic in Year 1, and we are going to be able to continue it in Year 2. Linda will continue in our training entourage, And she will be joined by Yolanda Cuesta from California. If you remember her from 2013, she was here at Library Staff Day doing an entire day on diversity. She'll be joining us this coming year, as well as Deetta Jones from Illinois, for those of you that may have been through the SILY program. Last year or in years past, you're familiar with Deetta, and she's from Illinois. We will have new topics for each of the letters for diversity, and I want to tell you now that next year's Y, like today's webinar, will be an in-person diversity day. We hope that you'll be able to join us, and that will be held on August 24th of 2016, 82416. So pencil that date in, and we hope that you'll be able to join us. Keep checking our CE calendar on our website. You will see each of those diversity topics popping up on our CE calendar. Or you can keep checking our Facebook page. You know they pop up there as well. Remember to follow us on Twitter, and also be on the lookout for your messages from the listserv. So thank you, everyone, for making this year such a success for Swiftland's year one of the Diversity Discovery Institute. I'm so energized and hopeful that year two will be a build upon what you've learned this year, and I thank you very much for your support. So if you have any questions, we're happy to entertain them at this time. And thank you, Jeanette, very much for enhancing the accessibility of Swiftland's webinars. That's another piece of diversity that was acknowledged early in this morning's webinar before we began. So it pleases me greatly that we've been able to add this component to the webinars and be more inclusive, which is part of being diverse. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a terrific weekend, and be safe if you are in the path of Ms. Erica.
Thanks, everybody.